welcome back to another episode of the Coffee, Commerce, and Catechesis podcast. Join us on our journey to learn more about the Christian faith and how we can live it out in our modern world. Social media. We love it, we hate it, we love to hate it, and we hate to love it. But is it evil? That's what we'll be tackling today. So Travis, over to you.
Thanks, Rigel, and thank you everyone for tuning in to another episode of the Coffee, Commerce, and Catechesis podcast. Today, Rigel and I are talking about social media, good, bad, evil, some combination of those things. We're going to tackle this from a number of angles, and we're going to start off here with a passage that comes from a January 2024 document that was released by the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops. It was a pastoral letter, and it was specifically on the topic of the use of social media. It's a bit of a lengthy passage here, but I think it's great for framing the conversation. So from that letter, the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops state, 20 years ago, few of us would have even heard the term social media. Now it permeates almost every aspect of our lives. The average Canadian social media user has 6.4 accounts and spends an average of 1 hour and 56 minutes per day perusing various platforms. Social media is unique in terms of its speed and its reach. Unlike at any other time in human history, massive numbers of people are now able to communicate almost instantaneously. And while social media's speed and reach exponentially increase the potential good it can do, they also increase the potential harm it can do. Even if we do not use social media ourselves, we are impacted by the role it plays in the spread of misinformation, the coarsening of civil discourse, the radicalization of political systems, and the mental health crisis that is especially prevalent among our youth. Of particular concern to us as bishops is research indicating the amount of time persons are spending on social media and the effect that such extensive use has on users' mental health and general well-being. Given the average global human lifespan, at present, each of us will spend an estimated 6 years and 8 months of our lives on social media, in contrast to 3 years and 7 months spent eating and drinking. In a faith tradition that treasures table fellowship, that is no small thing. And when we consider that the average teen now spends approximately 3 hours per day on social media, we are even more taken aback. How will the percentage of time our youth spend on social media impact the quality of their lives for many years to come? So that comes from a document released earlier this year from the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops. There's a lot in there. The document itself is very well worth reading for those who can dedicate the time to it. Rigel and I have done so. We're going to be tackling this document specifically at parts, but really more generally, we're looking at social media. So maybe to start off, Rigel, do you want to, and then I will do the same, do you want to be open and honest about your social media usage, perhaps specifically right now, and maybe how it's developed over time, and then I can do the same thing?
Yeah, for sure. I would say I use it far too much, as most people probably would. Depends on the day. If you're talking about which app I spend the most time on, I think it just depends on the day. And very naturally, I spent most of my time on LinkedIn. What I am liking about how I'm using social media now is I'm doing a lot more creating rather than consuming. So that's been a big change for me. I think I previously spent much more time on social media, and I think over time the apps and stuff have changed as well. It's probably primarily Instagram and LinkedIn right now, and that's about the extent of it. Always room for improvement though. What about you?
Well, before we go to me, if you had to estimate, we hear from the Catholic Bishops Conference there that on average, roughly 2 hours a day is spent by Canadians specifically on social media. And how they define social media, I'm not exactly sure. Does that count YouTube? Does it not? Some will say yes, some will say no. So I don't really know. But 2 hours is big no matter what, whether YouTube is included or not. So for you, if you had to estimate today where you're at, where would you say you fall on the time spent per day on social media?
That's tough. I've never actually thought about it enough to monitor. But I would say in aggregate, 2 hours, maybe 3 would probably be accurate. Like I have LinkedIn on all the time, and so I'll periodically check and stuff. So yeah, around that range.
And I'd probably be the same thinking about my own social media usage. It's changed over time. I'm old enough now, I'm 39, that I was around when social media sort of first became a thing. So I think finishing high school, or no, I was in university when Facebook was sort of starting to become popular. That was the first social media site that I can really recall. I know that there were some before that, and whether or not we use things like MSN Messenger or ICQ, these messaging services, whether we call those social media or not, I know will probably depend on who you're asking. But Facebook is one that everybody knows, and it was the first big one. And then from there, obviously, others, Twitter, now X, Instagram, WhatsApp would fall into that same category, and there's a whole bunch of others. And so if I think about them, my usage of them has changed over time. Thinking about where I'm at today, like you, I would almost exclusively be on LinkedIn. I've got a decent network. I've used it for probably 15 years now. I can think back to certainly during my MBA, which I did my MBA from 2012 to 2014. It was just an assumption that you had a LinkedIn profile. If you didn't, there was something weird about you. And I'd started using it before that. So, decent number of years that I've been using LinkedIn. I have a Facebook account, although I got rid of a Facebook account for a long period of time and only got it again a few years ago, mostly to stay in touch with my wife's family in Colombia because Facebook is ubiquitous. They use it for everything. So, and other than that, I try to stay off social media as much as I can. So I got rid of my Instagram account during the pandemic, early in the pandemic. Don't have TikTok, don't have Snapchat, don't have an X or Twitter account, and I kind of like it that way. I know for some purposes, even for what we do here on the podcast, we have to be on those platforms to some extent. But I'm thankful that you're the guy that's largely doing those things, so I don't have to be, and I can limit my usage of social media to mostly LinkedIn. But even though I'm only on LinkedIn and Facebook, I guess YouTube again, I don't know where that falls. Even if I'm only thinking about LinkedIn and Facebook, I'm still at 2 hours a day, probably. Like you, I just have my LinkedIn on kind of in the background, and I'll check it periodically. So it's a lot, right? No, by any measure, it's a lot. And I have to ask myself, as what the document from the bishops is getting at, is this is not an easy question, but we all should be asking it because almost everybody is on social media in some way, shape, or form. So let's dive into it maybe. Before we dive into specific things that the bishops have said and other things that either Pope Francis has said specifically, Pope Benedict before him, Pope Benedict the 16th was talking about this as well before the current Pope. For you yourself, have you seen concerning trends in your own usage of social media or in people that you love and care about, their use of social media? Or is it something that you don't really see any warning signs or concerning trends in your own social circle at this point?
No, there are definitely concerning trends. I think one of the main things that I notice is, especially when I come home from work, and that's like prime time for like Instagram scrolling. So as I'm doing that, it's the time when I'm home and my wife is here to greet me and stuff. And if she's saying stuff to me and I'm scrolling on Instagram, I'm only part listening. Now I have a very real focus problem where if I am not 100% focused on you, I'm not hearing half the things you say. And so if I am on social media and she's trying to talk to me, it just won't work. I will agree that I will agree to things without knowing I am. I'll just be like, yeah, yeah, and I've noticed that, and that needs to stop immediately. Other than that, I don't think there's anything super concerning, especially in my immediate circle. But I mean, obviously, like when we go out to eat and stuff, we notice this. And here I'm going to shout out the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops for teaching me a word that probably originated with Gen Z. It's called phubbing, phone snubbing. Very cool word, but it's a horrible thing to witness. My wife and I like to go out to eat, and when we do go out to eat, we see tables full of teenagers or young adults, and they are all on their phones. Every single one is staring down at their phones. This past weekend, we were spending some time with friends, and their kids were playing in the playground and stuff, doing things that kids should be doing. We look behind us, and there's an entire family, I would say 2 or 3 generations, about 6 or 7 of them in total, and they are all staring at their phone. Every single one of them. Now, they may have been playing Pokemon Go or something, but it looked like your usual social media scrolling and stuff. So I don't know, but that's what I've experienced so far.
I'd echo exactly that. I'll use 2 brief examples, one recent and one a little longer ago. So probably, a few months ago, my wife and I went out for dinner with our friends. I'll give them a shout out, Israel and Heidi, and their 4 beautiful young children. We went to mass and then went out for a dinner. I think it was a Korean barbecue restaurant. So there's 8 of us at a table, and at the table right next to us, full table, same size, so 8 to 10 teenagers, probably 14 to 16. I'm not entirely sure, but exact same thing. I know they weren't playing Pokemon Go or whatever it is, because looking over my shoulder at how annoyed I was at how loud they were being in some instances, I could see, and they were just on, one was on Instagram, another one was on, I don't know, some other service. It was obviously a social media service. There's probably ones I don't even know exist now that younger people will be using. And all of them at the same time were on their phones. And it wasn't until the food came that I was aware that they'd put their phones away. And probably some of them didn't even. They were probably still on it while they were messily eating their chicken wings and stuff. So that's one example very much of what you're talking about. And then I can even think of much more recently. My wife and I spent an evening with 2 of our nephews. They don't live in the same city. We don't get to see them very often. We miss them. And when they lived in the same city as us, we had a tradition where once a month we would have an aunt and uncle day with the nephews. And so we would take them out, do something fun, usually take them to their favorite restaurant is like Mucho Burrito. And so we'd usually do that. But because we don't see them very often, we'd like to do something special with them. And so what we did this time is we took them to the fancy restaurant at the top of the Calgary Tower. Not a cheap place to go, especially when you're taking like a 9-year-old and a 13-year-old. They don't really care that much, but it's cool views, cool time of year to do it. And so we did that with them. And it was awesome in some ways, but the 13-year-old who is beyond addicted to his smartphone, and he cannot for any measure of time be away from it. During the entire meal, he had to be on his phone messaging his friends on some service that I'm not even familiar with and I've forgotten the name, and he didn't know what to do without access to it for even, dozens of minutes. He just couldn't sit there for even 30 minutes, eat his hamburger and enjoy. And so that to me speaks to, I know my own concerning use of social media, and I look at young people and I can't even imagine what it's doing to their brains. We've talked about this before on other episodes, but it's worrisome, and it seems very normal now for younger people, knowing that, okay, we're probably on the same page. People use social media a lot. Let's just assume that that's the case. It's ubiquitous. Everyone has one account or another. Probably if you don't, good for you, but you're probably not listening to this podcast, because how did you hear about the podcast if you weren't on social media, I would assume. So let's assume almost everyone who's listening probably uses social media, and maybe a lot. Let's look at whether it is good or evil and try to unpackage this if we can. So maybe let's look at the good things about it first, or some of the potential good things. And I'll turn to the document again here and highlight 2 things that I think are relevant. So Pope Benedict XVI observed, a desire to connect with others, in whatever mode that might be, is a beautiful thing, saying, when we find ourselves drawn towards other people, when we want to know more about them and make ourselves known to them, we are responding to God's call, a call that is imprinted in our nature as beings created in the image and likeness of God, the God of communication and communion. I think that's profoundly true. We are social beings. We're made that way. So when you hear a pope talk about something like that, what are your thoughts? Do you agree with that? I do. It seems absolutely the case. How do you feel about a comment like that from Pope Benedict XVI?
Immediate agree. I mean, because especially my parents, like I say all the time, they're halfway across the world. And so for me to be able to pick up my phone and, WhatsApp call them, I still remember the days when there was like an extreme fee on international calls. And so if that still existed, chances are I would be paying very heavy bills to be able to contact my parents on a regular basis and just talk to them, hear their voice and see their face. But with WhatsApp, it's just so easy. Every night before bed, we kind of give them a call and just have a quick little catch up, and then we're off to bed. But yeah, I think the connectivity is really great. Even on LinkedIn today, I had a gentleman from Uganda connect with me. He's also a Christian, and he was just excited to connect with someone who also shares the faith. And so, yeah, just a very cool way for people from all over the world with no mutual connections to be able to connect over something they have in common. I think it's a great thing.
And I think even for what we're doing, Coffee, Commerce, and Catechesis almost certainly would have been, it would be impossible in any way, shape, or form to resemble what it is today and what we've been able to do with it without social media.
Unless we started like
Now,
a radio station or something.
precisely, it would be a completely different form of media. The path to doing what we're doing, talking to the people that we're talking to, would look radically different. It might still exist in some way, but it would be completely different. And it's hard for me to envision what that would look like without the use of social media, which is effectively the chief, other than word of mouth, people telling people about it, which super valuable. And please, if you're listening to this, please tell other people to listen. I appreciate it. But social media is the mechanism that, or the mechanisms, because there's different forms, obviously, the mechanisms by which we reach people. And if not for that, it'd be very difficult. And part of what we're doing, I know that this wasn't the intent, but part of what we're doing with Coffee, Commerce, and Catechesis is evangelization. We are using the tools that are available to us to, at the very least, talk openly and unapologetically about our faith and the hope that we have in our hearts. And that's an amazing, beautiful thing. Maybe, and we won't mention names or anything like that because some of these people might be listening, but you and I both had people reach out to us, many, many people actually, thanking us for some of the things that we talk about, thanking us for doing what we're doing. And they reach out via social media, which is incredible. So they heard about us via social media, almost certainly, and they reach out to us via social media to tell us, I appreciate what you're doing. Please keep doing it. Maybe you have an anecdotal story that you might want to share, and then I'll share one as well, about how social media has facilitated just that sort of thing that confirms we should keep doing what we're doing on Coffee, Commerce, and Catechesis.
Yeah, absolutely. There was, and like I said, I won't mention any names, but I had one of our followers on LinkedIn reach out, and I make a point to at least try and connect with the people who follow us and send them a note to say thank you. Also subscribe to our newsletter, which, by the way, if you're listening, please subscribe to our newsletter. But yeah, she had, when I contacted her, she basically said that she's been following the podcast. We have no mutual connections, by the way, no first degree, secondary, or third degree connections. There's just nothing. And she said she found the podcast, she listens to the episodes, and she said it's the form of catechesis that she didn't know she needed, which was extremely flattering and very humbling to hear. But she said she took some of the learnings and she's applying it in the girls group that she's involved with, which is super cool. And I believe she's based in Nigeria, somewhere in Africa, essentially. And, it just speaks to how distance just doesn't matter anymore because of social media. I mean, we're here in Canada, thousands of miles away, and we were able to touch this person's life without even knowing it, unless we had actively reached out and messaged them to find out, which is just such a blessing for us.
Yeah, and I think there's something that's comical and amazing at the same time about that. Like, here's two dudes in Canada having our dinky little podcast that we literally, when we started it, we said if this even impacts one life and helps one person find their way to Christ, it was worth it, and we'll keep doing it. And you find out via social media that there is a girls group somewhere in Africa that is hearing some of the things that we're talking about as part of their formation in the faith, which is so humbling and also amazing. Like that is a beautiful thing. And to build on that, I've had so many people reach out to us, and you and I have talked about how of the people reaching out to us, there are obviously ones that are thinking similar things and not reaching out to us to tell us, which is awesome. We also have people that don't like the things that we say because we're unapologetic about our faith. And so, yeah, we also get that hate mail or whatever it is, but we'll focus on the positive things. And had a recent interaction with someone that I worked with previously at a old job. Don't remember this person at all. We probably worked, in different departments, and so don't recall who this person was. But they reached out on LinkedIn to thank me for sharing the content that I'm sharing, and said, I believe the exact words were, "I find it deeply resonates with me." Now, I don't know exactly what that means, but it deeply resonates doesn't imply deeply offends or anything. Deeply resonates to me is a positive thing. And it's thanks to social media that I know that this is deeply resonating with this person. And this person certainly found out about it via social media too. So again, clinging to the positive element, the focus on communication and communion that Pope Benedict highlights, I think we can see the benefits of social media for that. And you and I are witnessing some of the fruits of that right now. I'll draw upon another element here, and we can talk about this a little bit before we turn to some of the bad things, which I think the bad things, some of them are so bad that that's why our attention goes there. And so I think it probably requires a little more time for us to dive into. But from the document as well, from the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops, they state, the popes have encouraged Catholic Christians to engage social media boldly, embracing new platforms to foster and sustain meaningful relationships, and even to share faith with others. You and I are both seeing that. And I am encouraged by our ability to have conversations with people who, I would imagine many of them, if not for us, God can work in mysterious ways. And so they might be reached by others. But you and I both know that we are reaching people through social media that weren't being reached otherwise. That to me is an amazing thing. And it's not just Pope Benedict, who we chatted about. Pope Francis is currently also talking about this, about the positive, beneficial things that can foster community. And yeah, I'm encouraged by that. And I think you spend a lot of time thinking about this idea of community and what it means and why it's important. And we're doing that via social media.
100%. Yeah, and I think, part of it is just social media, whether it's Facebook or LinkedIn, it has an ability to, just because of because of the algorithm, we know that it feeds you certain things. You can almost tell it what you like, and you can see more of it. And so, if you're truly following your identity on social media, you can almost find a tribe, just because the algorithm will realize these are the things that you're into and feed you more of it.
And you and I both found, and we've talked about this together, how it kind of feels like, thanks to social media and what we're doing with the podcast, those two things in union with one another, we have built a bit of a community for ourselves. Not just for the people that hopefully we're creating this content and sharing it with, but even for ourselves. And that's been so encouraging for us. And so we have to thank social media for what it has allowed us to do that is benefiting us as men, as Catholic Christians, trying to not just live faithful Catholic lives, but bring it into our professional lives as well. And social media is allowing us to do that. But you highlighted a word in there, and this is where we turn to the negative stuff. You highlighted a specific word. I'm going to draw upon it, the algorithms. And for people that are not tech interested or tech savvy, don't worry about algorithms. You don't need to know technical things. Just for your purposes, just imagine it's the technological ability to bring about automatic processes. And in terms of social media, the algorithms effectively try to figure out what you're interested in and then feed you a lot of that stuff, even if you don't want it to know what you're interested in. And we can think about a lot of dangerous ways. As an example, my wife and I talk about this very often. The advertisements on Facebook that my wife and I will see are shockingly different. Now, that makes sense. I'm a man, she's a woman, as one. I'm older than she is, second difference. Different professional backgrounds, et cetera, education backgrounds, et cetera. So we are very, very different. And so you would assume that the advertisers that utilize these algorithms to reach us have different audiences that they're trying to reach. Hence why we're seeing different things. But it's more pernicious than that, I think, because I'm a married man. Facebook knows I'm a married man. And yet most of the content I see is of a sexual nature, where it is women not wearing enough clothing. And it doesn't matter how many times I try to hide the content or say this is inappropriate, I keep seeing it because the algorithms probably assume, based upon probably real data, that men my age want to see women dressed that certain way. Whereas the stuff that my wife sees is like cooking videos and stuff. She's not seeing a bunch of shirtless dudes at the gym. Like, it's not sexualized on her side, but it is on mine. The algorithms are doing that. And they're trained through enough data collection to be like, it works over time on average. I don't know if you've had similar experiences, Rigel. I find this endlessly infuriating about Facebook specifically. I don't know what to do to stop it other than just not be on Facebook, and I try not to be as much as I can. Have you had a similar experience? Like, what has that looked like for you?
Yes, absolutely. It's been incredibly frustrating. So there are some pages that I will follow on Instagram, and they're kind of aggregators of different content that, they're not the creators essentially. So there'll be like beneath the sea kind of a page where it's just videos of sharks and whales and stuff on under the sea, and then randomly they will post some naked OnlyFans girl. And it's just bizarre to me, because what this essentially means is that they sold out. This model probably paid them some sum of money to post their content so that it goes out to all their followers. Like, I understand the business there, but that's not why I followed this page, and so I don't want to be seeing that. And before, I would be like, no, but I like the rest of their content. But now I'm just like, I'm sick of this. Anytime I see that, I'm unfollowing a page. So that's the go-to that I've seen today. As an addition to that story, I wasn't even following one of those pages. I just, like, now Instagram, like, it wasn't this way before. Instagram would show you only stuff from people that you follow. Now it'll show you stuff from people you don't follow. And so another one of these naked girls came up, for no reason at all. And so I had to hide it. But I don't think, maybe I'm just stupid at knowing how to use Instagram, but I don't know that there's a way to hide that kind of content, which I don't think Facebook is even interested in doing in the first place.
And I would agree with you. I think if there is a way to not see those things, they have no interest in making it easy for you to know that, because clearly what they want you to see is the content that is going to capture who they think you are on average, because they're not looking at committed Catholic men who are committed to their marriage, family men and stuff. That's not the average person in our society. They don't know you personally, but they know averages because they collect big data and do analysis on that data. And so they're pandering to the average man who's in your demographic in our culture and building things that cater to those people. And it doesn't matter how many times you say you don't want it, that you're still lumped into the averages. And so until society changes, which let's assume never, you're still going to see a lot of that stuff. And they have no interest in you not seeing that stuff, because they're selling their services to advertisers who are paying to reach who they think you are, which is the average person in your demographic.
So let's actually highlight why algorithms exist in the first place. I mean, the goal of these social media apps, especially for the purpose of their advertisers, is to keep you on the app. So they will show you content that they think will keep you on the app. As an example, if you're on Twitter, and you are linking to, in your post, I should say X, not Twitter. If you are linking to a post that is not on their platform, if it's to like an external article or something, the algorithm will demote it because it's taking you off their platform and they want you on the platform. Whereas if you have a link to someone else's X post, then that gets boosted because you're helping people to stay on the platform. So just an explanation of why algorithms exist in the first place.
Definitely. And so I'm going to draw again on this idea of algorithm and why algorithms are so important in the world of social media generally. And the business model of social media is predicated on the use of algorithms. If not, they'd be way less effective. And so social media generally is monetized, i.e. the companies with these social media sites make money by selling advertising. That's effectively almost universally how they make money, because it's free to you almost always. Some sites aren't, but like you and I don't pay for LinkedIn. We have the free version of it. Some people will for like an elevated service, but Facebook is free, WhatsApp is free. So why are these things free? Like, how are they making money? They're selling your eyeballs, your attention to someone else. And so the algorithms help them do that most effectively. And so in the document from the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops, this is where it turns to the negative stuff and what we're going to talk about probably for the rest of the episode here. The bishops state, the design of the platforms and the algorithms that dictate their performance can play on the worst of our human tendencies, leading to online environments that violate the core Christian values of truth and human dignity. Social media can give the illusion of creating bridges between people when it is in fact tearing apart our common life. You and I know that no matter how much we disagree with somebody and how much we dislike somebody, and just so if in case people aren't clear, being a Christian doesn't mean you have to like everybody. You have to love everybody. Like and love aren't the same thing. Check out our episode on what love actually is if you're confused about it. So even people that you vehemently dislike and you disagree with fiercely, you still have to love them, and you still have to see in them the image and likeness of God. You have to respect them. They have dignity no matter what they say, no matter what they do at all times. And I think social media seems, the data is confirming this now, but even if we didn't have the data, I think you and I could both agree based upon what we've witnessed. Social media seems to, in many respects, prey on our tendency to only hear what we want to hear, fall into echo chambers, suffer from confirmation bias, and then build upon our animosity towards people with different views, such that we either quote unquote cancel them, i.e., refuse to engage with them whatsoever, or we do nasty things to them, say nasty things to them. I don't know how Christian any of that is, but probably not very Christian. I don't know that people, myself included at times, when I fall into these tendencies, which is why I have to be aware of my own social media usage. I don't know if Jesus was standing right next to me physically. He can see what I'm doing at all times, so it's not like it matters. But if he was physically standing next to me, if I wouldn't say it, then I probably shouldn't say it ever, right? But it's very easy on social media, and I think we're all guilty of this, of forgetting that that's the case and saying all sorts of things. And the person that you say those things to, they never know if you feel bad about it afterwards. You probably don't reach out to them to apologize for speaking to them disrespectfully, disrespecting their dignity, etc., etc., etc. I don't think I'm unique in this. I think this is a tendency that the sites facilitate in all of us. Have you found that to be the case for yourself?
Yes, 100%. I think we have a tendency to, I mean, it's normal even in in-person interactions where someone will act a certain way or they'll say a certain thing. And if we've never met them before, we haven't interacted with them much, we might take that action or that phrase, whatever they said, and apply it to their entire being, which is not true at all. Someone might be having a bad day. So, on social media, this is made all the worse because you're connected to people globally. You definitely don't know most of the people that you might be interacting with on there. And you might see a comment that's, you might perceive as stupid or it's just offensive. And you'll just automatically think that this person is a horrible person. But that's not the reality. One comment is not the entirety of a person's being, and so definitely, I've seen that to be the case as well.
And we also know that things get taken out of context, can be taken out of context. Like I struggle personally a lot with the Holy Father, Pope Francis. Like I do struggle with him. I'm traditional. I'm conservative by nature. Pope Francis says things that I find endlessly ambiguous and frustrating. And yet I also know that people take Pope Francis's comments out of context constantly. No, you could probably add up all the things that every pope in history up till Pope Francis said publicly, and it would still be less than half as much stuff as we know Pope Francis has said publicly because of social media and the age of social media and 24/7 news cycles now. And so is it fair for me to sit here across the world from where he's spending his time at the head of the oldest contiguously operated organization on the planet and judge the cherry picking that media journalists will do and everything about the things that he's saying? It's obviously not fair. And yet I find myself tempted to do it all the time, as we all do, because things are taken out of context and social media facilitates the rapid sharing of those things in echo chambers where you're only seeing the things that you already believe and everyone else is commenting on it. And you all have the same beliefs about those things. That's a very dangerous tendency that we have, and social media tends to play off of it. And I think maybe a good example of that, a horrible example, but one that we should be real about, when there was an assassination attempt on Donald Trump. And I don't care what you think about any human being. If you think an assassination attempt on somebody is an okay thing, I don't know.
Or
There's
something to laugh about, make jokes about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, like if you think it's funny, if you think it's good, whatever it is, you should really reflect on what your values are in life. And I don't care what your religious background is or no religious background. Like the fact that someone almost got shot in the head on public television should rattle you a little bit. And yet I think what we saw immediately after that event is people on social media, Twitter largely, jumping into all sorts of dangerous commentary, being celebrated by other people who believe exactly what they believe. And some of it was frankly frightening. There was a professor at the University of British Columbia in the Faculty of Medicine. This person has a PhD. I think they've been a professional in that space for a long time, probably a highly, highly educated, intelligent person. And yet their commentary on Twitter, they subsequently deleted all the comments and stuff, but their comment on Twitter was effectively something like, how close, what a glorious day it would have been. I don't care what you think about that person. You are vocally stating, I wish this other human being had been shot in the head on live television. Social media makes it so easy for you to find out about that and then comment on it and have your comments celebrated by other people who also share your views. But if your views are fundamentally disconnected from what is good, true, and beautiful as that person's were, and they're being celebrated, that is dangerous. I don't know, Rigel, what are your thoughts? I was kind of shocked about that sort of stuff immediately after that event. And I'm no Donald Trump fan. Like, I think the guy's crazy, but I wouldn't wish for him to be assassinated. I don't
Yeah,
know what your thoughts are on that.
I completely agree. It's bizarre because you'll have people who are already in these echo chambers anyway. But nowadays you'll go comment on, like, let's take this post as an example. You'll go comment on that post, and then it'll be a bunch of his followers who are probably in the same echo chamber that look at his post and see your comment and like your comment, and if anything, that'll just reinforce your belief that you're on the right track. Where in the process is there a trigger to stop and make you think, maybe I'm on the wrong track? Maybe I need to look elsewhere. Maybe I need to reflect inwardly on whether what I'm doing is good or not. There's no process in place for that. It's constant confirmation bias. Like, it's on repeat and it's just cycled. Yeah, I think that's a really horrible thing about social media. Is we already, I mean, critical thinking is totally lacking. The Nowadays, if we seek an opinion that differs from ours, we are basically scholars. I don't know anyone outside of academia that actively does that. I mean, very few people. I won't say anyone, but very few people. But that should just be a natural thing that we do. Uh, but in a world where we don't do that anyway, it's just exacerbated by social media, and that's not a good thing for us.
So, with those examples in mind and the dangers inherent in social media, something that I have found myself struggling with, especially since we've had the podcast, and I don't just have my own personal presence on social media, but we also do stuff from the perspective of coffee, commerce, and catechesis. Touching on something that the document highlights here, I'll read it out and then we'll chat about it. The bishops state, we applaud the missionary spirit of those who have felt a call to witness explicitly to their Christian faith through social media, sharing quality resources about the faith, inviting friends to visit their parish or come to a retreat, celebrating Catholic feasts and practices online. We welcome more of this. At the same time, we recognize that the most fundamental way we witness to our faith is by the quality of our lives, how we treat other people, how we handle our disagreements, how we respond to challenges and disappointments. Indeed, whether we choose to be explicit about our faith on social media platforms or not, all of us, and that's emphasized, all of us are called to ensure that our conduct online gives witness to Christian virtue. For example, if we share our Catholic faith with others online, but do so in ways that are not grounded in charity, prudence, and truth, we may end up doing harm rather than good. I find myself reflecting on that because I know that there are times, and people who have listened before know about my obsession with the truth, and it's equally an obsession with hatred of lying. For theologically, there's a lot of reasons there. Satan is the father of lies, so I mean, he's the father of them. I shouldn't like them, and I find myself when I see lies, especially some of the lies our culture tells us, whether it's the lies surrounding attacks on the family, celebrating those things as if they're goods. They're based on illogical, idiotic arguments, and yet people in our culture are foisting them upon us, foisting them upon children. That stuff I really, really struggle with personally. And then put me in a social media environment, and I feel tempted in all the wrong ways to be anything other than charitable with these people. I find myself almost longing after blowing up their worldview and tearing them down. And that's not Christian. And I struggle with that. And I find myself struggling most with it when I'm in a social media setting. If I was in person with these same people, I'd probably still feel pretty frustrated. Let's not pretend I'd rise above it, but I'd be much, much, much more careful with the words that I'm inclined to use in those circumstances. I'd more easily see the person and the dignity that they have than when I'm online and I can just sit back and, fire away on my keyboard. I find myself struggling with that, especially given the stuff that we're doing. I know others who are open about their faith on social media have similar tendencies. Rigel, have you found that at all since we've been doing this?
Personally, what I've found is, yes, I see these comments all the time, whether it's on YouTube or LinkedIn, Instagram, whatever it is, there are people just slandering Jesus Christ, calling him the fairy in the sky, things like this that are, as Christians, deeply offensive. I find myself from time to time about to reply to their comment, and then I'll type out the comment, and then I'll be like, nah, this is not worth it. And I'll just erase it and move on, which I'm glad I do because I don't want to engage in that kind of conversation, especially over social media. The thing with social media is that you're using a few words to talk about a very complex topic, usually, right? And there's no body language involved, there's no tone of voice, there's a lot of stuff missing that would be included in an in-person conversation that is missing from social media. And so I just don't think it's great to open doors and have very surface level conversations, but when you want to get into the really deep stuff, I don't think it's worth doing on social media.
Another part of the document here related to what we're discussing is focusing on the perspective that is not your own. And we've come back to that idea many times. Confirmation bias is simply you filter out everything that would disconfirm what you already believe or want to be true and only cling to and grab the stuff that confirms what you believe. Social media makes that so much easier. It's already a tendency we have. It's a cognitive bias. It's the way our brains are wired. We can offset that a little bit, but we have to do so consciously. It doesn't just happen. Social media makes it much harder to do because the algorithms feed us the stuff that facilitates this confirmation bias. We as Christians are called to more than that, though, to rise above that, to appreciate that being in the world but not of the world means that oftentimes we're engaging with people in a way that will be challenging for us, but we're called to do so charitably, to hear them, make sure that they know that they're heard, that they're respected, that they're loved, even if the things that they're saying are evil. And that's difficult. And so the document focuses a little bit on we need to be aware of other perspectives and engage with them. And it says, the Christian commitment to truth implies not only that we pursue what is real, but also that we look at the vastness of reality from a wealth of angles. The danger of fake news on social media exists alongside the danger of echo chambers, in which we read only from a narrow set of sources and engage with a narrow set of like-minded voices that reconfirm what we already believe rather than broadening our understanding of reality. So that's that idea that we've been talking about. That is very difficult. And even within Christian circles, it's difficult because within the Catholic Church, as a great example, there are fiercely different views and opinions on a lot of things that guys like you and I will fiercely disagree with other well-intentioned, committed Catholics on certain issues. We can't just pretend their views are by default less valid than our own. That's nonsense. Our views could be invalid. And social media makes it easy for us to dismiss those people and pretend that they don't exist. Can you think about ways, are there ways that you know to push ourselves to be outside of the echo chambers we're inclined to find ourselves in, especially when we're on social media?
I think that's so tricky on social media because it's literally built to give us more of what we like. And I don't know how you would balance your views versus opposing views. You know, you'd have to equally like the stuff that you like to see versus this, and you have to actively seek out the stuff that you don't want to see and like that as well. But I think honestly it would just confuse the algorithm. Like, social media is not built for us to seek out differing opinions. I think we have to have conversations with people, and really it's, if we're talking about connectedness, which is what social media is supposed to be all about, I feel like people is where it comes down to, right? And we have to have conversations with them, talk through their views, and it has to be much more personal. I don't think that the content that you see on social media can be relied on to get both sides of the equation.
And I think sometimes on social media, my personal social media use is almost exclusively in the areas of our Christian faith. Part of it is just so that I understand things better, so that when you and I are having conversations or interviewing people, I'm a little more educated about this stuff. I'm better formed myself. I can hopefully take that into my daily life and learn lessons from others that I need to incorporate into my own practice as a committed Christian. But some of the content that I'll consume because of my own story, my own journey to the faith, is often with Catholics having to defend the faith against non-Catholics, who sometimes non-Catholic Christians are the most hateful in some respects of anybody, because like the number of things that I've heard from people that I thought we were friends, as I thought we loved each other, they're openly mocking. And so then I find myself being like, well, I'm going to mock you too then. And it's easy on social media. I'm going to mock the stupid things about, I think they're stupid. They would, mock me in return and say, it's not stupid for this reason. And I find myself inclined to do that. Social media makes that all too easy. I would probably never say most of those things if I was sitting at a table with these people, but when it's on social media, it's so easy. So even we Christians fall into that. And we're held to a higher standard than non-Christians, certainly. And we're supposed to serve as an example, especially be prepared to give a reason for the hope that's in our heart. Well, a lot of people, if they went and looked at inter-Christian dialogue on social media sites, they wouldn't see a lot that would say, yeah, that you look like a pretty hopeful people. I'm super excited about this. And yet that is what happens. I find myself watching it and I don't know, I think, would that happen anyways?
When I think about comment sections and just interactions on social media, the first thing that comes to mind is I'm sure you've probably seen a video of this, but there's a gate and two dogs on either side of the gate, and they're barking and being super aggressive, and it looks like they're about to rip each other to shreds. And then someone comes and opens the gate, and they're just quiet and they stop doing anything, and they're just suddenly so tame. It's all bark, no bite. People feel comfortable because they have the safety of a screen and a keyboard. In-person interactions are a little bit more uncomfortable. It's confrontational, and I think social media removes all those elements of communication and interaction, and it just makes it easy for people to bring the worst out of themselves, I think.
And I think I want to turn now to looking at the financial incentives that these companies who provide social media platforms that we all use, most of which we don't pay for. And obviously they don't do it. They're not charities. They're not philanthropic entities. They're not doing this because it's for our good. They're doing it to make money. And you and I will come back to probably forever this idea around capitalism. Capitalism isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it can be abused. I would argue, and we have episodes that we've done in the past where we talk about what capitalism really is, contrasting it with an extreme like communism, and why capitalism is probably, insofar as we can tell, the system of economic organization that is most consistent with Christianity, but it can be abused. This has been warned about by the Catholic Church for going back centuries now, stemming back to the Industrial Revolution, seeing abuses of a capitalist system. But the good things about capitalism cannot be ignored. The balance is somewhere between the two extremes. And I think as Christians, when we think about these social media providers operating in a capitalist system, in many respects, they exemplify the abuses of capitalism. The document itself says, social media platforms benefit financially from keeping people online as long as possible. That's obviously the case. I don't think a single person, even people that don't know anything about business, would argue that people at these companies want you online less. It's obviously the case that they want you to be engaging with their content using the platform. That's crystal clear. And so the question becomes, well, how are they doing so? And what are they doing to keep me on there as long as possible? So simple examples. The idea of notifications, right? You get a dopamine hit. We know this now. Every time you get a notification, they want you to engage with the platform every time. So Instagram was famous for this. They would have no reason for you to be notified about something, like no one was liking or commenting on your posts or whatever. So after a few hours, the algorithms would pick up the fact that, oh, they haven't been online for 4 hours. Something must be wrong. They would invent a thing, which might be, you might like this content, send you a notification about it to get you back in the platform that you haven't been engaging with. So they were incentivized to do this because they're trying to get advertisers to be paying for your attention. They can't have your attention if you're not in the platform. So I think you and I see the financial logic in that. We also see the danger in that. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think this is something that social media platforms could ever be anything other than this? Or is this part of social media and there's nothing we could do to have them incentivized otherwise?
I mean, there are ways around it. It comes down to the business model, I think, right? Most of them have, or let's take Facebook as the main example. They've built such an empire off advertising that to imagine that they would change to a paid model where we pay for the use of Instagram and Facebook and WhatsApp and stuff um, in order to not be exposed to advertising just seems bizarre and unrealistic to me. I don't think that would be the case. And so I feel like this is just something that we have to deal with. I think there are examples of companies that could do it well. Let's use Duolingo as an example. It's supposed to be for a good reason. You're trying to learn a language, which is a good thing. You're trying to learn something which is good for you, and so they've created a notification system. It hacks into your psychology, if you want to use those words, to encourage you to use the app more. Now, in those cases, it's a good thing. It encourages you to keep coming back and learning the language. For social media, I'm not sure that it's a good thing. In fact, it's not. I don't think it is at all. And it brings you back. And then, if you're a doom scroller, like a lot of people are, you maybe finished like a 2-hour scrolling session and you just got off the platform. And then you might have just posted a photo or something and it gets a bunch of likes. And then you get those notifications and it brings you back onto the platform and you're scrolling again for another 2 hours. Like that's not a healthy habit to get into.
So the main crux of the conversation we're having is whether social media is good or evil. I think from the outset, you and I would both be of the opinion that it is just a thing and it can be used for good or evil or somewhere in the middle between those two extremes. I tend, as is always, towards a more pessimistic view. I think there's enough information now from people that were involved in the construction of Facebook and Instagram about the psychological impacts that they knew their technology was going to have on young people specifically. They knew it was addictive. They chose to do it anyway. Some of them chose to do it anyway, even though they would forbid their own children from using the thing they were trying to get other people's children to do. There's something almost beyond despicable in that fact. Like, it's so bad that you forbid your own children from using it, and yet you want as many people's children that aren't your own to be using it. That to me is scary to think about. To their credit, some of these people who have talked openly about this, I forget some of their names, but there's many of them now. To their credit, they admit it now. They probably look back, and if given the chance, as is so often the case, we all make mistakes. We all realize after the fact that we shouldn't have done something. And so they talk about it now, which gives us a window into this, which is awesome. But the technology now exists. And the people that are in control of the technology, they're not undoing these things. They might give warning messages, say like, practice responsible social media use, and then here are all the tools to be irresponsible with it. But we've given you the warning, so we've done our part. There's something that's just not enough. So knowing the tendency towards, let's call it evil things. I'm not saying the technology is evil, but towards evil things that happen as a result of the use of social media. Knowing that children, it seems, or teenagers, so children, older children, use social media on average 3 hours a day. I think it's higher than that in Latin America. I think about my wife's family in Colombia. I bet you it's probably 5 hours a day. I've seen numbers that say it's 5 hours a day on social media. Let's assume people sleep 7 hours a night, okay? And let's assume they have a job or school, and that's like 8 to 9 hours a day. So just between sleeping and school, you're down to less than 10 hours a day of time, and people are spending like 30 to 50% of that time, presumably, on social media. That's a lot. You and I are expecting fathers. I am going to be very, very, very deliberate about technology in our home when our children arrive. When it comes to social media, what are your thoughts about social media usage with your own children?
Just no is a simple answer. And it's not going to be easy. Like, let's be very clear. We were having a conversation with some friends this past weekend, and they have 5 kids. The parents have phones and they have social media and stuff, but none of the kids do. The problem with that is that kids need to be entertained. They need to be kept busy. And so it's not easy for the parent to keep them entertained. So I think what happens, and the trap that a lot of parents fall into, is that they will relent and they will give in to this. I'll give you social media, and they will pass on the phone and let their kids do whatever just for a moment of peace, which I can empathize with, but it's no excuse. I mean, one of the things that I've heard other people say is choose your hard. So, you can choose the easy way now and find it very hard later, or you can choose the hard way now and find it easier later. And, the way I'm going to be going is I will pick hard now and easy later. So, no social
Totally.
media.
And this goes back to, well, bravo, because I agree entirely. Shocker, you and I agree. We're in our own little echo chamber here. We agree with each other. But I even think, you and I are also capable. We identify echo chambers. We talk about it. You and I, we will be discussing the topics of these conversations, and we will appreciate that because we're in echo chambers, we will actively seek out opposing views. So at the very least, we can engage with them and debate them. And if you're like me, blow them apart. Like I take particular joy in that. But I can't blow apart something I don't understand or even know exists. So you and I do step outside of our echo chambers. And you and I, as individuals, we use social media ourselves. So we're not saying that it is categorically evil and that no one can ever use it. We're not saying that. So if anyone is listening to this and thinks that that's what we're advising, that's not what we're saying. But we direct people back to an episode we did earlier in 2024 with our friend Braden. It's called Parenting Pitfalls. So you can find that episode, and we talked extensively about social media, specifically almost universally channeled through smartphone technology. So, they're almost one and the same in many respects. Most people don't use social media outside of a smartphone environment, so you can't really separate them. But the effects that these technologies have on young people, and Braden, as a high school teacher, he sees the impacts on young people in a very pronounced way every single day. He has decided that his kids won't have smartphones and they won't be on social media until, he would like to say ever, is when we laughed about that, but until 16. You and I think, are at the same place. We do understand people who find it hard to say no entirely. I know that you and I will struggle. And so it will come down to accepting hard now so that it will be less hard in the future. That is so hard to do. There is a book that I'd recommend people read if they're so inclined. It's called The Procrastination Equation. It's by a professor. He's a sociologist at the University of Calgary's Business School. I literally almost started a PhD in this. I was in the program, I was accepted, and I was going to focus on procrastination, which is in many respects, it is just another way of looking at this need for instant gratification and why we are so bad at focusing on the long term at the expense of the here and now. What we do is prioritize the here and now at the expense of the long term. Even when we know it's categorically bad for us, we still do it. So as parents, it's understandable why people, I just want some peace, so I'll give the kid the phone and they can do whatever they want on it or whatever, because it's hard right now. It's super hard right now. It's easier now to give them the phone, but long term, what you're doing is forming habits in them and in yourself, because you're giving yourself the easy way out. And so you give yourself the easy way out now, it becomes easier to take the easy path in the future. And the compound effect of that over time is very, very scary. And if you look at the data surrounding social media usage and smartphone usage, we're seeing that now. Rigel, you're a decade younger than me. You've been on social media in some way, shape, or form for the vast majority of your life. I can look back to a pre-social media time and contrast the differences. Now, my memory is imperfect, obviously, and so I don't want to pretend like it's crystal clear, but there was a time in my life where social media wasn't even a thing we knew existed. I don't think that you can confidently say that. So maybe as a way of wrapping up here, your perspective looking back now on social media usage, and would you do things differently if you go back in time for your own usage? And knowing that, what advice would you have to people who are struggling with social media addiction today?
Honestly, I think social media for me started at an age like the perfect time. I honestly just loved playing outside so much that it's not something that I would have given up for extra social media time. Now, as I got older, like I was the youngest of my friend group, and so as I got older and my friends started graduating and started leaving Thailand and going to various countries for college and stuff, then I started to get more lonely. There was less playing outside time, and so social media became more of a like a reliance, I guess, or something that I rely on. Would I go back and change things? I don't know that had enough of an. I think I have more of an issue now than I did back then. So I don't know that I would change much. I think I need to change something now. I think keeping our kids in mind, especially knowing that I'm going to have a daughter, and something we haven't touched on, which is actually from the document that we're talking about here, is that the document mentions that it's desirable for our perception of reality to be aligned with actual reality. And generally, that tends to be the case. And I probably paraphrase that horribly, so please go read the document. But when it comes to social media, it's highly, highly curated. The stuff you're seeing about people's lives, it's not their real life. They're posting it's a highlight reel. That's what it is. They're posting the best parts. And to you as an outsider, it seems like, wow, that is so awesome and so great. But you're not seeing the messy parts. You're only seeing what they want you to see. Some influencers now, they post behind the scenes and stuff. Like you'll have, a fitness influencer who won't post in the amazing gym lights slathered in body oil, and you'll see the difference. And that makes them unnatural because they're not doing what everyone else is doing. But I see people applauding that all the time. And honestly, my hope for the future generation is that more people start craving more realness, that the algorithm adjusts for that as well. That's my hope. And so what about you, Travis?
For myself, obviously, I need to be more intentional about my social media usage. Knowing myself, I'm glad that I don't use a majority of social media platforms. I think the document says, the average Canadian has 6.5 accounts. I think I have 2 or 3. So I'm intentional about that. I intend to continue being intentional about that. I don't even allow myself to, like, when people share stuff with me from other accounts, generally speaking, I don't even click on it because I don't even want the temptation to go in and see what I'm missing out on. I just don't need that. Maybe I'm mentally strong enough to say no, but I just don't trust myself in that respect. So I'd rather just not open the door. It's like I'm powerless in front of chocolate. So I don't buy chocolate. I just can't have it in the house. If I have it in the house, I'll eat it and I'll eat too much of it. So it's better for me to just say no categorically and not give myself that temptation. So I know that there's probably a lot of interesting things that are shared on X, formerly Twitter. But I also know that I'm inclined to doom scroll and get into fights with people online and be unchristian in my engagement with them. So I can't have X. It's not good for me. And I know that. And so I think I need to be intentional. And I would encourage anyone listening, no matter what, think about your own social media usage. If you're a parent, especially appreciate, and I need to take this seriously as I prepare to be a parent, about the behavior that you're modeling, because it'll be really, really, really difficult. Even if you get on board with the idea that social media is terrible for young people, if you're using it all the time, it'll be really hard for you to convince younger people that it's a bad thing and they shouldn't be doing it too. And we can use that in other respects. Like if you are super obese and you're telling young people to go to the gym every day and eat healthy, but you're not doing it, why would they listen to you? That's silly. That's nonsensical. And so if you are trying to tell your children or your nephews or your students or anyone else who's in a generation following you that you should not be on social media, it's bad for you, etc., and then you're getting into Twitter fights all the time, well, they don't take you seriously. You're a hypocrite. And we know what Jesus says about those people. So don't be one. Rigel, maybe to wrap us up here, one piece of advice that you have based upon our own social media engagement with people because of the podcast, one social media tip, as it were, to keep social media usage towards the good end of the spectrum as opposed to the evil end of the spectrum from a Christian perspective.
I would have to say my main bit of feedback is, if you can, avoid using it, or at least take an active effort to limit your use. If that's not possible, I would go to a secondary piece of advice saying create more than you consume. And even if that's not possible, like a tertiary piece of advice, I would say curate your feed at the very, very least. make it something good, follow the right people, make it educational content that you follow, so that at least the people that you follow and the stuff that the algorithm feeds you is productive, instead of completely wasting your time. But ideally, you're going with piece of advice number one.
And my social media tip or piece of advice would be, conduct yourself as if Christ himself was standing next to you in whatever you're doing. And whether that's creating content or consuming it, and Rigel, that was a good distinction between the two. Whatever you're doing, if you conduct yourself as if Christ himself was there with you, and he is, so remember it, conduct yourself accordingly, I think that can cut out a lot of the really negative stuff at the very least, and maybe even help you get to a point where the vast majority of your social media usage is actually for the good. And so I think that would be my tip. I need to practice that better. I'm okay at it, actually, but I need to be better at it. And so I give that advice as much to myself as to anybody else. And I think it's worth remembering going forward. Rigel, do you want to wrap us up in a quick prayer?
Absolutely. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord, we thank you for this time together. We thank you for all our listeners and lift them up to you. We pray that this conversation has reached them at the right time and will affect their life for the better. We surrender our work and our intentions to you. May we and our listeners be a blessing to those around us. Help us especially to be more present in our encounters with others by sacrificing our screen time. When we do encounter others online, help us always to be charitable, kind, and loving, utilizing all the gifts of the Holy Spirit to bear the fruits of the Holy Spirit. This we pray in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thanks for the prayer, Rigel. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. At the risk of wrapping up on a note of being labeled a hypocrite, please do follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on TikTok, on all these channels that I've just spent a little bit of time shredding. But we are trying to make stuff that's for the good, and we're trying to use social media accordingly. So if you're listening to this, please do follow us on social media platforms, like our content, and share it with others who would benefit from it. We would really appreciate it. Anyways, until next time, this has been the Coffee, Commerce, and Catechesis podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and God bless you.
God bless.